Today, we're going to be talking about creative finance, and this is one of my absolute favorite topics about real estate investing. Once I learned what we were going to talk about here today, my business took off to a whole new level, and I'm really excited to share it with you. My name is Amy Rendy. I'm a real estate investor, wife, mom to twin daughters, and I love to help people get started in real estate. The first strategy I want to talk about today is seller finance. Seller finance is something that can be done when the property is owned free and clear or completely paid off by the seller. Sometimes this is called a seller carryback or a seller carry, but essentially it all means the same thing. Here's how it works. Instead of going to a bank, the seller actually becomes the bank, and you make monthly payments to the seller for the house. So let's say a seller is looking to sell his or her property for $200,000, but they're not in need to get all of the money up front. What you could do is offer them a small down payment, whatever you decide upon, because the beauty of this is it's completely negotiable, and offer to pay the seller over time. That would be structured as a seller finance deal. Now, you might ask, why would a person want to do seller finance versus getting all their money up front? Well, if you know anything about amortization and an amortization schedule, you'll realize that when you buy something with interest on any kind of a note, the bank actually makes a lot more than the purchase price. So in this case, the seller becomes the bank and essentially makes much more money over time. We have found that when we are talking to a landlord or a real estate investor, they are fully aware that they're going to have to pay capital gains tax when they sell the property. A lot of them have actually purchased the properties themselves on some form of seller finance, and they're very willing to do that if it means deferring their taxes over time. In addition to that, it becomes a completely passive investment for them if they can still get $5, $6, $7,000 on a portfolio over time and not have to do anything just because they used to have the asset. A lot of them are willing to do that. So never be afraid to approach that if you know somebody's either a real estate investor or a retired landlord. The second strategy that we're going to talk about is subject to, or purchasing the property subject to the existing mortgage. Now, what that means is you're not assuming the mortgage. The mortgage actually stays in the seller's name, but the deed transfers to the buyer's name. The existing mortgage stays in place with the same balance owed, the same number of payments remaining, and the same interest rate. We have purchased properties subject to where the seller simply wanted to walk away. We have purchased other properties where we've given some money to the seller at closing, $5,000, $10,000, depending on what the situation is, and we worked out a deal that way. As you can imagine, depending on the fluctuations in the market, this could be a great way to pick up a property with a very low interest rate. Now, you're probably wondering, why the heck would a person do that? Why would they walk away from a mortgage and leave it in their name? Well, there's a lot of situations where if a person were to sell the property on market with a real estate agent, they would have to come to closing with money, either because the value has decreased or the value has not increased enough for them to be able to walk away with actually some money or without bringing money to the table. Which brings me to my last option. It's actually called a hybrid deal, or a combination of seller finance and subject to. A hybrid deal is where a seller is willing to sell their property subject to the existing mortgage, but they have a significant chunk of equity that they don't want to walk away from. So essentially, with a hybrid deal, you're going to have either 2 or 3 components depending on how it's structured. So the first component, if they're willing to do a subject to, is the outstanding mortgage balance at the day of closing on the property. So that is going to be one amount that you're going to be dealing with. So this would be a situation where you agree on a sales price. Part of the transaction is going to be taken over subject to the existing mortgage, and then the other part is going to be put back on a seller carryback or a seller finance note. And then there could be something in the middle if you agreed upon a down payment in this transaction. I'd like to go through an illustration of a hybrid deal so that it makes a little bit more sense. Let's say you and the seller agree upon a sales price of $200,000. And in this instance, the seller is willing to let you take over their mortgage subject to. So let's say in this example, you have a $200,000 purchase price and the existing mortgage balance is $150,000 that you're going to be taking over subject to. The next part of the deal is that you've negotiated a down payment to give the seller at closing of $10,000. So you've got the purchase price minus the loan amount that's existing on the balance that you're going to be taking over subject to, less the down payment. And the remaining balance of the $40,000 in this scenario is going to be given to the seller in the form of a note or a seller carryback. And what that means is you're going to be paying payments to the seller over time for that $40,000 of equity that he or she wants to get out of the property. We call it a hybrid deal because it's a combination of seller finance and subject to. So it's just another way to structure a deal so it works for both parties. They're willing to do subject to, but they have some equity they don't want to walk away from, which is where the seller finance or the seller carryback note comes into play.
I hope this video was very helpful for you to understand that there are so many other ways to buy properties other than just cash or traditional financing. Like I mentioned, when I learned these tricks or techniques, my business grew to a whole other level. So if you'd like to get started in real estate, drop a comment below and let's have a conversation.